and we'll get the show on the road. Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Sam. I'm a coach here with Leland, and today we're going to be talking about market sizing. As we go and get started, feel free to scan the QR code that you should have on your screens right now. Sign up for Leland. If you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll try my best to monitor that. But in the meantime, feel free to introduce yourself. Tell me where you're joining from. You can, again, throw that in the chat window. Also, if any of you do want to turn your cameras and join Leighton here, if not, I'll just chat with Leighton this whole time. Oh, there we go. We've got a Nathan as well. Hey, Nathan, how you doing? We'll go ahead and get this kicked off. So today we're going to be talking about market sizing. This is one session of what is a full week of events. So I'm sure most of you already know this, but Leland is doing a full week of consulting focused courses. And this today, Wednesday, is all about mastering the case. So we're talking about case interview prep and the different components of a successful case interview. So many of you may have already attended like the mental math or the math structuring exercise. I'm doing market size. And then after this comes a chart and table analysis and case communication course as well, taught by different Leland coaches, all with experience in management consulting. Tomorrow, there's another series of events. I'm sure Erica will drop like a full schedule in the link in the chat or something like that. We'll see. Give it a try. But I would love to start with just a few quick questions that I would ask you to answer again in the chat. One, have any of you already interviewed with McKinsey, Bain, or the Boston Consulting Group in particular? If so, please drop that in the chat. And then two, we're talking about market sizing. So I am curious what your largest purchase in the last 12 months has been. What markets have you all participated meaningfully in the size of over the last year? And what did you buy? What has been your largest purchase the last 12 months? I'm trying to think back over the last 12 months if I've bought anything really expensive. No new cars, no property. I bought season tickets to University of Utah football. I'm a big U of U football fan. Those were probably my largest purchase. Flight tickets from Ismail. I like that. Tuition. That's funny. Yeah, school is very expensive. Concerts. I have a friend who just paid $1,500 for a Taylor Swift ticket for this upcoming weekend in LA. So if any of you guys are going, Taylor Swift, I see it from iPhone, whoever iPhone is. Oh, and Erica also on the Taylor Swift train. I like it. Okay, so like I said, we are going to move relatively quickly today because we only have a half an hour. I want to dive in as quick as possible. But by way of introduction, my name is Sam. I spent the first 5 years of my post-undergraduate career working for Bain & Company. And while I was there, I did a lot of different casework. I would certainly say that's one of the biggest advantages of working in the consulting space is that you get experience seeing a lot of things. So while I was there, most of my time was spent on their private equity practice, where we helped big private equity firms as they thought through market diligence, whether or not to buy companies or how to structure those transactions. But I also did a bunch in the oil and gas space, did some M&A work, merging some oil pipeline companies. I worked for a security camera manufacturer, that same company that puts security cameras in offices and schools across the country. Did a bunch from top to bottom. I also participated in what are called extra tens. These are outside of the Bain typical work process, things that you add on. At Bain, it's supposed to be about 10% of your time is outside of your normal casework. The biggest one I participated in was recruiting. I was the school team lead for Brigham Young University's recruiting team at Bain, and then also participated as a member of the broader Bain interview team for undergraduate schools. So I would go to lots of schools across the country and interview Bain applicants to become associate consultants and associate consultant interns. While I was there, I probably conducted 150 to 180 interviews for different Bain candidates. And so I have a lot of experience working through this interview process and really kind of seeing what's required to get over those hurdles and get into the firm. I'm also was a loyal Bain World Cup participant. For anybody who doesn't know, Bain World Cup is a global soccer tournament that Bain & Company holds where they invite people from all of their offices to come together in one major city and compete in a soccer tournament to see which office is the best. So I got to travel to 4 different cities. Well, technically I traveled to 3 different cities, and that's because my first year at Bain & Company, Dallas, my home office, hosted the tournament. So people flew from all over the world to compete with us. But then I went to LA, where we had Bain World Cup, London, and Rome, which was incredible. Okay, so we're going to chat market sizing. I'm going to go through first, why do we use market sizing in a case? Why is it worth practicing? 2, there are 2 real flavors of these questions and the way that they can be structured. I'll give a quick hit list of some don't miss these tips, things that can just help you sense check and make sure you're processing this correctly. And then lastly, I'm going to try and save at least 10 minutes at the end where we can go through a couple of practice questions together, where I'd ask you to break out your paper or put it in your notes app and follow along, do the exercise before I reveal the answer, and just kind of give yourself a sense for how well you're doing in these market sizing exercises. And if this is a place where you should spend some significant time practicing either on your own or with a coach. So first, why market sizing? Nearly every consulting case includes some component of market sizing. Now, when we say market sizing, we're really referring to the number of dollars that are being spent in a given market on a good, a service in 1 year. That's the way we talk about market sizing. Now, sometimes there are different ways that those questions can be asked. Somewhat infamously, consultants are known for their brain teaser-like interview questions. And one of the most stereotypical that I've heard is, how many ping pong balls can you fit in a Boeing 777? Now, that might be a weird question, but honestly, it's just market sizing. What we're asking you to do is to take something that you don't know, that nobody expects you to know, break it into small component parts, put together a math problem with some simple assumptions, and get to an answer that is plausibly correct or within the realm of being correct. And so these questions are not built to test your knowledge of industries or to see how well you know one particular space or one particular fact. They're built to test your ability to break down unknown things into known things and then add those known variables back up until we get a plausible answer to what we didn't know before. They also combine a series of critical consulting skills: structuring, mental math, the analytics horsepower that sits behind us, some basic assumptions, and then, of course, our communication skills in how we take all of that, pull it back together, and present one coherent answer to our interviewer. They're often disguised as part of a broader case, but not always. So sometimes in the case, they'll say, hey, we're going to talk about a client, and one part of that answer is going to be starting with a market sizing analysis. But sometimes they might just come out straight and say, hey, give me the market size for cheeseburgers in the US. So it really depends, but always kind of be on the lookout for when you can use these skills, because they're sometimes embedded inside of other questions. So let's start with the first flavor of these. And I would say the most common, probably 70%, it would be my experience. And that's a top-down market sizing question. So what a top-down question means is that we're starting with something large and pretty known, often the population of the United States or a number of US households, something really big. And then by process of elimination, we begin to segment that known thing up into smaller and smaller groups until finally we come to the group that applies specifically to our product or service. So here's an example. How many Ninja Creamies should Shark Appliances plan to sell in the United States over the next 3 years? So I don't know if any of you guys are on TikTok, but lately my TikTok has been full of Ninja Creamy recipes. I bought one myself. It's a very popular appliance, but it's selling out quickly. So if you are a consultant working with Ninja Creamy and you are trying to figure out, hey, how many of these should we plan to make? A quick market sizing analysis would be really helpful. Now, because it's a new product, we don't have bottoms up information for us to build a market size based on known facts at the bottom level. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the top and we're going to say, hey, what is the total population that this addresses? How many people are in a typical household? What percentage of those households are likely to purchase a product like this? and then what is the price? That gives us a view of our total addressable market size for this product. So again, this is a tops-down approach. We start with something really big and known, like the total US population. We start to segment it up. For example, if you live in a household, multiple people in your household do not need the same kitchen appliance. So we segment it by number of households. Then we apply some other barrier here. I put some asterisks around number of households that would purchase. There's clearly other sets of questions that we could ask here that we can make some reasonable assumptions about until we get to some view like, hey, maybe 3% or 5% of households would care about a product like this, times by a purchase price, and that gets us a reasonable market size. Now, you'll notice it's not going to be right. This isn't a known thing. Nobody knows the answer to this question, but the way we break it down, the logic we use to structure out a series of assumptions to get us to an answer that feels plausible is what is actually being tested in a market sizing interview question. So again, it's not about getting the answer right. It's about how we choose to run the process. So that's flavor number one, top down. Flavor number two would be bottom up. So this is when we have the smallest possible unit, and that can be known or assumed. And then we add those things up until we get to a broader market. This is most common when we're considering a micro market or one specific group of things that is very targeted, maybe in one community, one city, or with one business. So for example, how much revenue can the drive-through of a Chick-fil-A franchise do in a day, right? This is one specific instance. It's a micro market that we can make some assumptions about. If it's a drive-through, we know it's probably going to be supply constrained, meaning that we can pretty quickly estimate how many customers they can serve and then apply some filter around how many hours of the day they're fully busy versus the hours of the day when they might be not fully occupied. So again, this one I'm going to start at the bottom up. How many customers can I serve in an hour? The average car maybe takes 1 to 2 minutes at the final stage of the drive-through, right? That's the only one that counts because we're going to count things coming off the end of the line. So if we say, hey, the average car takes 2 minutes, that means that a drive-through can serve 30 cars an hour, right? I can then make some basic assumptions around what percentage of my day is fully utilized or fully occupied versus what might be lower utilization or lower occupancy hours of the day. And I can add it up and say, this is how many hours I have in the day. This is how many cars. From there, I can say, what is the average ticket price for a car? I can throw out an assumption there based on what I know about my own experiences buying fast food. And that gives me the revenue of a Chick-fil-A franchise drive-through in a day. Now you're going to notice this isn't a tell me the size of X market in its wording, but it is a market sizing question. It is an exercise that tests our ability to take something we don't know, break it into assumable or knowable components, put it back together, and present an answer that could plausibly or reasonably be true. And that's what we're doing in market sizing. Again, it doesn't matter if my answer around the Chick-fil-A drive-through revenue is correct. That's not what we're testing. We're testing the process of breaking things down and putting them back together. I saw that Erica just finished her Chick-fil-A fries. She got them on DoorDash, I think, if I remember correctly from our pre-call little conversation. So it doesn't quite add to the revenue of the drive-through, but it's good to know. I would assume that most people here have had experience with Chick-fil-A drive-thrus. They tend to be very, very quick. Okay, some final tips before we dive into a couple of exercises. Remember, nobody expects you to get the answer right. They only expect you to demonstrate some reasonable logic that makes sense when you put it back together, and then sense check yourself along the way. If at the end of the day you said that the Chick-fil-A drive-thru is probably doing $1 million a day in revenue, well, that doesn't make much sense. $300 million a year is a lot of money for a Chick-fil-A to be doing just through its drive-thru. And so because the sense check doesn't pass, it would probably be a knock against you in the interview, even if your logic along the way is correct. Sorry, I think this light just shut off. Okay, second, be very careful with the units that you're choosing. The units that you use are going to carry you all the way through. And we don't want you forgetting the units or dropping them off or changing units later on in the exercise. So if we're talking about cars per hour at the Chick-fil-A, we need to remember a car per hour is not the same as dollars per hour, or is not the same as sandwiches per hour. It's not even the same as people per hour. So let's just be very careful with which units we're using as we're moving through a market sizing exercise. I skipped number 2. If you're choosing the numbers, pick easy numbers. You'd be shocked at how many times people are like, oh, well, when I go to Chick-fil-A, the average meal for me costs $11.50. So let's use $11.50. It's like, that's a much harder number to do math around than $10. So I would flex a little bit and say, hey, I'm just going to round and pick the $10 number. No one's going to call you out on that and be like, well, it's all right. It's actually $11.50. No. They're going to be fine with you picking 10. So just pick easy numbers when you're the one choosing. In other parts of the case interview, I do not recommend rounding. I don't recommend asking to round. But in the market sizing, if you're coming up with the numbers, pick easy numbers. Okay, my 4th tip here is that the communication is a critical part of this exercise. And so don't forget to explain your thinking. If I ask you how much revenue does the Chick-fil-A drive-through do, and you go silent for 45 seconds and come back to me and say, oh, I think it probably does about $6,000 a day. And I had no idea how you got there, what stages you went through to get that answer. It really doesn't serve the purpose of the interviewer to evaluate your logic and reasoning. So make sure you're consistently communicating about how you're breaking down the problem and then putting it back together for a final answer. And then lastly, use that sanity check. You'd be shocked how often something comes out in one of these interviews where it's just so clearly unreasonable. The answer is way bigger than what the market would truly bear. So make sure that you're always checking yourself as you go along, saying, does this sound reasonable? Does this sound potentially realistic? Okay, if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. I see one here. How much time are you typically given when solving these questions? It depends. I would say the more complex the question, of course, the interviewer is going to expect that to take a little bit longer, and we'll account for that. But take the time that you need to make sure that you're getting it correct, but no need to be overly comprehensive or too precise. You can move through them with some quickness. Okay, excellent. Should we take our time to solve the math problems first and then walk the interviewer through, or should we walk them through as we solve? Jason, it's a great question, and I think it really depends on your ability to do the math on the spot. If you're capable of just doing the math in your head as you move, I think that is the most effective way from a communication perspective. However, if that is going to risk you getting the math wrong, it's not worth it. You should take a second, make sure you get the math right, and then continue on from there. Okay, so let's do exercise 1. So I'd encourage you all to get out some paper or use like the notes on your computer and do this along with us. Again, there's no right answer here, but I do think that there is a structure that is reasonably common to solve a question like this. So the first industry we're going to look at is the casket and coffin market. You and your team have been contracted to work alongside a funeral services company. And you've decided that you're going to recommend that they add coffin and or casket sales to their offerings as part of this potential adjacent offering. So what is a reasonable market size assumption that you should use in your analysis for the US coffin and casket market? While you guys start building out a structure, I'm going to tackle some of these questions, but please be working on the side for those of you that are doing it. Can you do the math on pen and paper? Absolutely. But most of the time, for all of the major consulting firms, they will not allow you to use a calculator. Can you ask further clarifying questions? Absolutely. And if something isn't clear in your interview, you should be asking those questions. How do you recommend finding the balance between asking for numbers versus making them up via assumption? I think feel free to ask that. So for example, you could say, hey, is there any data that we know about underpinning this this question, or would you like me to just form some basic assumptions to put this together? I think a question like that is really quite fair. And oftentimes the interviewer will even say, hey, we don't have any numbers here, so feel free just to make some assumptions for me. The last tip that I might use there is to say, build it out first in words. And then you can ask and say, hey, the first thing I want to do is figure out, for example, the average price of a Chick-fil-A order. Do we have data on Chick-fil-A order sizes, or is that something you'd like me to assume from my experience? So you can ask those types of questions as you go along as well. It doesn't need to be all at once. Can I extrapolate based on your own experiences? Absolutely. I think that's very, very, very helpful. So I would encourage it. Okay, so coffins and caskets. Have we decided to do this as a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach? You can, I don't know, throw it in the chat or something. It feels like there's this lag effect to the chat. Yeah, so Parker says top down. Great. Annie did the same thing. Wonderful. I'm assuming the majority of you will do a top down approach. Certainly the approach I would probably take here. So let me outline the way I thought about this one. So I started with a US population. We are looking specifically at the US. It was in the prompt that we're looking for the US coffin and casket market. So I looked at the US population, which is about 300 million, 350 million, somewhere in that range. And I took an average life. Now you're going to notice something really quickly, which is the actual US population is probably closer to 330, but that didn't seem very divisible by 75. So maybe I could have gone like 320 and then said the average life was 80 years. But what I'm doing is I'm adjusting my assumption just slightly to keep the math very round. 320 is very easily divisible by 80, where 300 is very easily divisible by 75. So I've just tweaked the numbers around the edges to get me to some easy math. That's why I've structured it like this. So when I do the math here and I say, okay, there's 300 million people, 75 years, that's roughly going to get me 4 million deaths a year. Now, I know that the population is changing over time. Death is, a moving age range as well. So certainly, there are certain years where that will not be correct. And it's not supposed to be correct. It's supposed to showcase that I've broken something down that I didn't know, right, which is how many people die every year in the United States, into two component parts that I do know, which is roughly the population of the country and roughly average life expectancy. And that got me a reasonable assumption around how many deaths occur each year in the United States. Okay, then I know that not everyone who dies chooses to be buried in a coffin or a casket. So I applied some percentage here. Now, if you're totally shooting in the dark, like you have no idea what the number is, feel free to work with your interviewer and say, look, I don't know. Most of the people in my life are buried in a coffin or casket. That's been my experience, or that's been the experience of the community or the culture that I grew up in. I want to say that that's probably 60, 70%, and just see how your interviewer responds. Sometimes they'll nudge you up or down. You're not being judged on how you know any of these numbers. You're being judged on your ability to break down these problems. So then you apply a rough price. Again, you might not know what a casket or coffin costs. Now, I would say I see a comment in here that says that they're crazy expensive. They are expensive, but I would always remind you that your life experience, depending on where you're from, where you kind of grew up, the people that you walk with, etc., is likely not universal. And frankly, it's probably not modal in the traditional math sense. And so I would always somewhat be bouncing these off of the interviewer to say, does this feel right? Do you think it's higher? Do you think it's lower? And just get their buy-in. Again, the numbers don't matter, but you don't want them stuck on the fact that you chose some number that seems so different from their experience that they wonder whether or not you're really thinking about it correctly. So I take the 60%, times it by the 4 million, gets me 2.4 million times $2,000. Again, I'm choosing very easy round numbers, and that gets me to $4.8 billion a year in the United States for the coffin and casket market. Okay, we're going to do one more. Got about 5 minutes left. Your team has been hired by a major online manufacturer, and a major online furniture distributor who's looking to expand their sales via their existing distribution channels. They've identified mattresses as a product worth exploring. To start, your partner has asked for an overall market size and a breakdown of the mattress industry. We're just going to do the market sizing today, but this is a very normal start to the question. Okay, while you guys are working on that, I'll answer a few comments in the chat. Could you split the annual deaths up by age range? Yeah, absolutely you could. But I think it doesn't get you an answer, frankly, that's that much better than the answer that we did before. So while it's perfectly fine to think about it that way, unless you know the death rates with any type of precision of 0 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 plus, it might actually just complicate it without getting you a better answer. And so I would just be sensitive to if I'm adding too much. And yes, sorry, Annie, thank you for the clarifying question. Yes, this is just the United States. Okay, does market size usually mean the total market size or our client's market size? So I think you're asking around gross margins. Usually we're talking about total revenue, and then we'd segment out the margins from there. And does it mean market share? So market share would be a component of market size. So first, it's total dollars spent in a space in a year, spent in a market in a year. And then we could say, okay, we have 20% of that, meaning that our revenue is 20% of all of the dollars spent in the space. Okay, does the breakdown here mean a breakdown by product or region or price? So that's a great clarifying question. We're not going to worry about the breakdown just for time today, but it could mean any of those things. It could be like mattress size. It could be lots of different elements. Okay, for sake of time, I'm about to move on and show how I thought about this. Again, there's lots of different ways where maybe this could be done, but this is the way I chose to do it. Again, I started with the US population. That's 300 million. The average household in the United States is roughly 3. So I said there's 100 million households. Clearly, I've missed a million on that bullet point. 100 million households. And then I thought, okay, well, how many bedrooms are there? Because mattresses aren't really a factor of people or households. They're a factor of bedrooms. So I thought, maybe the average is about 3, right? Now, I have no idea how accurate that is. So I make caveat in my interview. I might say something like, hey, there are obviously a lot of 1-bedroom apartments and there are a lot of 8-bedroom houses. There's a wide spectrum here, but I'm going to say that once you give and take both sides, that it's roughly 3 mattresses or 3 bedrooms per household. That means that I have 300 million installed mattresses. Now, the replacement rate on a mattress is important here as well. So I would say you replace your mattress about every 10 years. There's probably be more frequent than that, but I don't think it is, which means you're selling 30 million mattresses annually. Now, some mattresses are king size mattresses that like move up and down and keep themselves cold. And others are like pretty flat twin size mattresses. But I just picked a very round price point that said, hey, the average mattress probably costs about $1,000. And then that got me a size. Now, that's only households. And so if this were a real interview, I might also call out some of the limitations of my analysis. For example, well, what about commercial mattress sales? For example, hotel rooms or Airbnbs, places that aren't households. Now, maybe they want you to also estimate that, or maybe they'll say, nah, that's out of scope. Don't worry about it. But I think it showcases a lot to say, hey, this is only considering one vector of this space, where clearly there's another vector of size and significance that we should consider. Okay, we are out of time. I'd be happy to work with any of you guys as you're preparing or thinking about Bain & Company. There's a QR code here, but thanks for coming. You can find me on the Leland platform, and great. Okay, talk to you all later.